The scent of wild yeast and despair clung to Hearthstone Bakery. Javier, a baker rooted in generations of tradition, faced ruin. An eviction notice threatened to extinguish his family's legacy. But as a violent storm brought a desperate, soaked stranger through his door, the quiet end he expected began to transform into an impossible, unforeseen beginning. The Hearthstone Bakery breathed a scent from a bygone era. It was a warm, complex perfume of wild yeast, the deep caramelization of crust, and the faint, earthy dust of the hundred-year-old bricks that formed its oven. This was Javier's inheritance, a legacy of scent and substance in the heart of Oakhaven. At 36, his hands, dusted with a permanent layer of flour that settled deep into the lines of his skin, moved with a muscle memory that spanned 3 generations. The floorboards beneath his feet groaned a familiar language, and the cool, worn brass of the front doorknob held the imprint of his grandfather's hand, and his father's before him. His world stood in stark, silent contrast to the one next door. Through his own clean, unadorned window, Javier watched the queue for sugar-spun delights, a chain patisserie that assaulted the senses with a neon-pink sign and the thumping bass of pop music. Their windows showcased confections of impossible colors, luring customers with fleeting sweetness designed for a 10-second video clip. He saw them pose, pout, and snap photos before their first bite, the experience seemingly consumed by the camera before it ever reached the palate. His own window displayed only a single proud example of his craft: the Oakhaven rye, its deeply cracked, flour-dusted crust holding no immediate appeal for the digital age. This devotion, however, didn't pay the bills. On the worn wooden counter, tucked beneath a proofing basket, lay a stack of invoices, each stamped in an increasingly aggressive shade of red. Perched atop them was the real harbinger of doom, a final notice from his landlord. The crisp, impersonal paper felt cold and sharp in his hands, its bold, unforgiving print giving him 7 days to settle 3 months of arrears or vacate the premises. The words seemed to mock his grandfather's favorite saying, "El pan tine alma Javi, you don't sell it, you share it." A bitter wave of self-doubt washed over him. Was he a fool? A relic clinging to an obsolete tradition in a world that craved only sugar and novelty? Despite the knot of despair tightening in his chest, his hands didn't falter. With a practiced, almost reverent motion, he slid the last batch of loaves from the peel into the cavernous brick oven. The heavy iron door clanged shut, the sound echoing in the empty shop. It was a sound of finality, like a vault being sealed. It didn't feel like baking for a business anymore. It felt like a eulogy in flour and water, a last, stubborn act of defiance against his own fading hope, a final, quiet conversation with the ghost of his grandfather. Then the sky broke. A sudden, violent squall descended upon Oakhaven, turning the cheerful afternoon sky into a bruised, slate-gray canvas. Rain fell not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets, instantly clearing the street of the sugar-spun queue. Gutters overflowed, and the world outside Javier's window became a churning, gray blur. The storm seemed to mirror the tempest in his own heart. He let out a long, slow breath, the sight of the empty street offering a strange, melancholic relief. It was time. He untied his apron, folded it neatly, and walked to the front door, ready to turn the sign to closed for the last time. Just as his fingers touched the lock, the door was thrust open with a desperate push, a gust of wind and rain swirling in. A figure stumbled inside, dripping a puddle onto the worn floorboards. It was a woman, her dark hair plastered to her face, her light jacket soaked through and utterly useless. She clutched a large, saturated camera bag to her chest, as if protecting a vital organ. Her face, pale with cold, was etched with the weary frustration of a traveler ambushed by the elements. This was Serafina. She wasn't looking for artisanal bread or a quaint local experience. She was looking for sanctuary. "I am so sorry," she stammered, her teeth chattering slightly. "The bus isn't coming. I just needed to get out of that for a minute." Javier looked at her, not as a potential customer, but as a fellow human being beaten down by a storm. The commercial instinct he barely possessed had vanished completely. There was no sales pitch in him, only a quiet, ingrained instinct for care. He simply nodded, gestured vaguely towards the small, empty tables and turned back to the counter. He took a loaf of the Oakhaven rye, still warm enough to feel alive in his hands, and with a long, serrated knife, cut a single, generous slice. He placed it on a small wooden plate, set it beside a steaming mug of hot water, and carried it over to her. "Warm yourself up," he said, his voice soft, barely rising above the drumming of the rain on the roof. He placed the offering on her table without expectation, a simple act of human decency, and retreated to the quiet solitude of his counter. Serafina wrapped her trembling hands around the warm mug, the heat a small miracle against her chilled skin. She looked at the slice of bread. It was nothing like the subjects she usually photographed. No glossy sheen, no artful dusting of powdered sugar, no vibrant berry coulis. It was just brown, a humble, rustic slab of sustenance. She was a food blogger, but in that moment she was just a cold, tired woman in a storm. Mechanically, she picked it up and took a bite. And then the world stopped. The storm outside, the chill in her bones, the professional fatigue that had been gnawing at her for months, it all dissolved. The crust was formidable, a satisfying crackle that gave way to an interior so impossibly moist and tender it felt like a paradox. A wave of flavor washed over her palate, complex and profound. There was the clean, bright tang of a mature sourdough, a deep, nutty sweetness from the rye, and a subtle, earthy undertone that tasted of the grain itself. It was a flavor that bypassed her analytical mind and struck a chord deep within her soul. It wasn't gourmet. It wasn't trendy. It was something far more essential. It tasted like a memory she didn't know she had. It tasted like the security of a childhood kitchen, the quiet strength of a grandparent's hands, the enduring warmth of a hearth fire on a winter's night. It was the taste of something real, something honest in a world saturated with artifice. A strange, unexpected emotion welled up inside her. She felt seen, understood, cared for, by a slice of bread. Her professional tools lay untouched in their soaked bag. The thought of pulling out her camera felt like a violation, a sacrilege. To capture this moment with a lens and a filter would be to diminish it, to package it for consumption when its true nature was a gift. Instead, she quietly unzipped a side pocket of her bag and pulled out her slim laptop. Shielding the screen from the shop's dim light, she opened a blank document. In the quiet corner of the bakery, with the rain as her soundtrack, she began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Javier, polishing glasses behind the counter, glanced over. He saw the focused intensity on her face and assumed she was catching up on work emails, a remote worker finding a temporary office. He left her in peace, the quiet companionship a welcome change from the usual oppressive silence. An hour passed. The rain softened to a gentle drumming. Serafina closed her laptop, a sense of catharsis settling over her. She stood up, her clothes still damp but her spirit immeasurably lighter. She walked to the counter, met Javier's tired eyes and said, with a sincerity that startled him, "Thank you. That was more than just bread." And with that she pushed a few crumpled dollars onto the counter, far more than the bread was worth, and slipped out, disappearing back into the damp, gray afternoon. Javier, bewildered by the encounter, simply tucked the money into the empty cash register, not giving it another thought. That night, in the quiet, glowing corners of the internet, a story began to ripple outwards. It appeared on Reddit, in a community called R Made Me Smile, a place dedicated to small, uplifting moments. The post was by a user named The Sincere Bite, Serafina's online moniker. The title was simple and intriguing. "I didn't have a meal today. I was given a hug, and it was hidden inside a slice of bread." There were no pictures, no artfully styled flat lays, no geotags, no hashtags. There was only text, raw, heartfelt, and beautifully descriptive. Serafina wrote not as a critic but as a person. She painted a vivid picture of the storm, of her own bone-deep weariness and frustration. She described stumbling into a silent, unassuming bakery that smelled like honesty. She wrote about the quiet, stoic baker who didn't try to sell her anything, but simply offered a piece of his craft as an act of pure kindness. Then she described the bread. It wasn't built for Instagram, she wrote. It was built for the soul. The first bite was a shock, not of some explosive, engineered flavor, but of profound, grounding comfort. It tasted of patience. It tasted of heritage. It tasted like every good, simple, true thing you've ever forgotten. The antithesis of the fleeting, sugary highs I chase for a living. It was a hug from an old friend, the kind that wordlessly tells you that everything is going to be okay. The post resonated with an unexpected power. In a digital world saturated with polished, commercialized authenticity, Serafina's unadorned prose was a lightning rod. It tapped into a collective exhaustion with filters and marketing, a deep-seated yearning for something genuine. The comments section exploded. People didn't just upvote, they shared their own stories. A user wrote about his grandmother's tomato soup. Another recalled the smell of her father's coffee. The thread became a tapestry of food memories, a celebration of comfort over spectacle. And threaded through all of it was one recurring question, asked with increasing urgency. Where is this bakery? Where can we find this bread? The post was cross-posted to our uplifting news, then to our food, and even to local city subreddits as people tried to triangulate its location based on Serafina's subtle clues. The internet, in its strange and powerful way, was on a mission. Meanwhile, miles away, Javier was oblivious. He had spent the evening packing his grandfather's baking tools into a wooden crate, the familiar weight of each piece a fresh pang of grief. His phone, which he rarely checked, lay silent on the counter. He had already accepted his fate. The Hearthstone Bakery was, in his mind, already a memory. The next morning, the air was crisp and clean, washed new by the storm. Javier unlocked the door to the Hearthstone Bakery for what he believed would be the final time. His plan was simple and grim. Clear the last few loaves from the shelves, begin dismantling the fixtures, and hand the keys to the landlord. He braced himself for the hollow echo of the empty room, a sound he had been dreading for weeks. But the echo never came. Instead, he was met with a sight so incongruous it made him stop dead in his tracks. There, standing patiently on his doorstep, were 5 people. A young couple holding hands, a student with a backpack, and 2 older women chatting quietly. His first thought, a jolt of pure panic, was that they were from the landlord's office, or perhaps a collection agency, a public shaming to cap off his failure. He steeled himself, his jaw tight. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice rough with disuse. The student, a young man with bright, eager eyes, stepped forward. "Hi, yes. Is this the place that sells the hug bread?" Javier stared at him, utterly baffled. "The what?" The young man's face fell slightly, thinking he'd made a mistake. But the woman beside him quickly pulled out her phone, her expression alight with excitement. "He means this," she said, turning the screen towards Javier. "We've been following the story all night." Javier squinted at the small, bright screen. It was a Reddit post. He saw the title, "I didn't have a meal today. I was given a hug." His eyes scanned the text, his brain struggling to connect the words to the quiet, damp woman from yesterday. He read her description of his bread, of his simple gesture. It tasted like patience. It tasted of heritage. She had understood. In a few paragraphs, this total stranger had articulated the entire philosophy of his life, the silent creed passed down from his grandfather that he had never been able to put into words himself. She hadn't just tasted the rye and the starter. She had tasted his intention, his history, his heart. As he was reading, more people arrived. Then more. A line began to form, snaking out from his humble doorway and down the sidewalk, past the now empty entrance of Sugar-Spun Delights. They were all looking at him, their faces filled not with pity, but with a kind of gentle, hopeful curiosity. They had come not just for bread, but for the story. They had come for the feeling. Javier looked up from the phone, his gaze sweeping over the line of strangers. He saw their smiles, heard their quiet, expectant murmurs. He saw the young man who had first spoken, now explaining the post to a newcomer. He saw the hope in their eyes, a reflection of a hope he thought he had lost forever. The dam of stoicism he had built around his heart for years, the one that had withstood the bills, the loneliness, and the crushing weight of impending failure, finally broke. A hot, stinging pressure built behind his eyes, the faces in front of him blurred. The quiet little bakery, his grandfather's legacy, wasn't dead. It was more alive than it had ever been. He tried to speak, but his throat was tight with a knot of unshed tears. He cleared it, took a shaky breath, and finally managed a choked, quiet reply. "Yes," he said, a single watery smile breaking through. "Yes, it is. Welcome." A month later, the Hearthstone bakery was transformed. The old brick oven and worn wooden counters remained, but the oppressive silence was gone, replaced by a constant, gentle hum of life. The bell above the door chimed a steady rhythm, announcing a stream of new and returning faces. The air still carried the profound scent of baking rye, but it was now mingled with the bright aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the low murmur of happy conversations. The shelves, once a symbol of failure, were now perpetually in a state of beautiful depletion, the bread often selling out by early afternoon. Javier had even hired help. A bright-eyed college student named Leo, the same young man who had first asked about the hug bread. Leo managed the counter, his youthful energy a perfect foil to Javier's quiet, focused presence at the kneading table. The weight on Javier's shoulders had lifted. He still worked with the same intense devotion, but now a quiet smile often touched his lips as he shaped the dough, his movements lighter, surer, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. One sunny afternoon, amidst the gentle bustle, the bell chimed and Serafina walked in. She wore no drenched jacket this time, just a simple dress and a warm, genuine smile. She stood in line for a moment, simply observing the scene, a look of deep satisfaction on her face. Javier spotted her from behind the counter, and his work paused. He wiped his hands on his apron, and a wide, unreserved smile spread across his face. He gestured for Leo to take over as he walked to meet her. Without a word, he led her to the small table by the window where she had sat during the storm. He returned moments later with a perfect slice of the Oakhaven rye and a cup of coffee, placing it before her not as a baker to a customer, but as a friend. "I don't know how to thank you," Javier began, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save my bakery, Serafina. You reminded me why it existed. You saw what I was trying to say with my hands." Serafina took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes kind. "Javier, I should be thanking you," she said softly. "When I stumbled in here, I was running from more than just the rain. I was drowning." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "My job, it had become about chasing trends, about food that screamed but said nothing. I was reviewing meals I couldn't remember an hour later. I was exhausted by the noise, the performance of it all. I was starting to hate the very thing I loved." She looked at the slice of bread on her plate. "And then you gave me this. It was quiet. It was honest. It didn't ask for anything. It just was. It reminded me what I was supposed to be looking for in the first place, not perfection but sincerity." She met his gaze, her own eyes shining. "You didn't need me to find you, Javier. I think I needed to find you." Their shared glance held a profound, unspoken understanding. It wasn't a rescue. It was a recognition, a mutual healing sparked in the heart of a storm, over a simple slice of bread. The legacy of that rainy afternoon was now a permanent fixture in the bakery. On the warm brick wall, in a place of honor, hung a simple, elegant frame. It didn't contain a glowing review from a food critic or a photograph of a celebrity visitor. Instead, it held a high-quality print of Serafina's Reddit post. The title, "I didn't have a meal today. I was given a hug and it was hidden inside a slice of bread," was clearly visible, a testament to the day everything changed. Right beside it in a matching frame was a faded black and white photograph. It showed a much younger man, with Javier's same kind eyes and strong hands, standing proudly before the very same brick oven, a faint, flour-dusted smile on his face. It was his abuelo. The two frames hung side by side, a bridge across time. The old world and the new, tradition and technology, a grandfather's quiet wisdom and a stranger's heartfelt words, all connected. The hearth, once fading, was now burning brighter than ever, its warmth reaching far beyond the walls of the small Oakhaven shop, a legacy renewed and shared.